Hello everybody, welcome to neural networks and deep learning. It is in continuation to our previous learning video on neural nets and deep learning. So session information is on to have a basic focus on understanding how neural network works, implementation of neural networks, and an introduction to convolutional neural networks. Significance of this module is after completing this video, candidates will be comfortable implementing neural networks on their own, as examples has been cited with illustrations. Candidates will be able to understand the internal workings of a convolutional module. Let's see how to train the neural net. In our last video, we looked over at how a layer in neural network works. In this video, we'll learn how multiple layers come together and how a network operates as a whole. We'll start with forward propagation. In the figure, you can see each black box represents a layer. The input is given to the first layer and output is computed as weight vector multiplied by input and some bias is added to it. Then some form of non-linearity, recall ReLU from the last video, is applied and this result vector is stored as output. Now the output of first layer becomes the input for the second layer. Same thing is operated with second layer as well. Now you must be wondering, why are we doing the same thing again and again? The answer is very simple. Neural networks start by learning simple features in initial layers and move to learning complex features in the subsequent layers. Now we have reached the last layer. It works a bit differently than the previous layers. In this layer, we compute the training loss for the network. Loss basically is quantifying the neural network's error, that is, how many things network got wrong during the training process. Next, the loss computed during forward pass is propagated backwards through the whole network. This is known as the back propagation of gradient. The computation of gradient is useful to update the initial random weights as we have calculated in the previous introductory video of CNN. These weights are representation of what the neural network has learned. Here in this formula, theta represents weights, eta represents learning rate. Now representing differential equation for training loss, dl by d theta is computed. Computation of gradient will become more clear as we implement the neural network. Let's move to Python to see how neural network works. Open CMD, type Jupyter Notebook. Now we can see Jupyter Notebook. Here you have to make a new notebook. You rename it as neural network. Here import numpy as np, n d in, h d out is equal to 64,110. Here n is the number of data items, din has the number of neurons in our input layer, h has the number of neurons in the hidden layer, d out has the number of neurons in our output layer. X is equal to np dot random dot rand n comma din. Y represents np dot random which is n d out. Now W1 is the weight. Next we calculate n is equal to np dot random dot rand n d in comma h. Next is W2 is equal to np dot random dot rand n h comma d out. We initialized x our input data, y our input levels associated with each data point randomly. Also, weight vectors are always initialized randomly, as you can see. If you have a data set available with you, you can replace the data in it with x and levels in it with y. We will also cover CIFAR 10 dataset in our next video. Let's put learning rate as 10 raised to the power minus 6. Learning rate is now represented. For t in the range of 500, let's have 500 epochs. H is equal to x dot w1. So this computes weight w multiplied by x and it stores it in h. Similarly, applying ReLU nonlinearity is the next function. Now finally computing class course and storing it in y underscore pred. Using mean squared function to quantify our loss is calculated. Next, print. Let's print epoch number and find the loss. Here this computes the gradient. If you differentiate mean squared function, you get 2 multiplied by, as you can see here. So this is back propagation of gradient, where grad underscore w2 stores the gradient of w2 vector. Next is grad underscore h underscore ReLU stores the gradient of ReLU. Next, copy grad underscore h underscore relu to grad underscore h to compute gradient of hidden layer. Here grad underscore h stores the gradient of hidden layer. Next, grad underscore w1 stores the gradient of w1 vector. More sophisticated libraries like PyTorch or Keras or Theanos compute this gradient automatically. However, we'll be using these libraries in our future videos. Now let's continue. With learning rate computation with W1 and W2. Finally, updating our W1 and W2 based on the gradient. Let's run all this and see what the result comes. We can see now our loss initially is very high, and as the number of epochs increases, it starts to go down quickly. Finally, see how small is the loss. Next is, let's move on to see how our neural net will work when our input is an image. All the pixels in an image are stored as one node, or simply one image corresponds to one node in the layer. If the size of image is 1000 by 1000, then that corresponds to 1 million hidden units. Combine this with our weight vector, where each set of 1 by 1 pixel is represented by one weight. This makes the size of our weight vector as 1000 units for a single image. Now 1000 by 1000 by 1000 makes a total of 1 billion parameters. 1 billion parameters for one image are huge and not even feasible. So it is better to put our computational resources elsewhere, as it will require high usage of GPU and will overshoot the cost of computation. In an image, you have some local spatial correlation which makes that nearby pixel are related to each other. So this is the best solution. For example, a pixel of an eye would mean nearby pixels also belong to the eye. Now reduce connection to the local regions. How it can be done? If instead of looking at individual pixels, we start looking at a group of pixels, our parameters are now reduced drastically. In this image, we look at 10 by 10 pixel as a whole. Therefore, our parameters are reduced from 1 billion to 10 million. This reduction is of second order of magnitude, which is a significant improvement in our computation. Reuse the same kernel everywhere, because interesting features, that is the edges, can happen at anywhere in the image. We share the same parameters across the different location. This is called convolutions with learned kernels. These individual kernels are learning a part of the image. So convolutional neural nets, we can see the figure where learn multiple filters is the objective. All kernels are also called the filters, learn something different, and as a whole make an abstract representation of an image. For example, 1000 into 1000 image with 100 filters of filter size 10 into 10 will have 10,000 parameters. You can check better with the following reference link. If the input has therefore 3 channels, red, green, blue or RGB, 3 separate K by K filter is applied to each channel. Output of convolving one feature is called a feature map. This is just sliding window. For example, the output of one part filter is a feature map. Now, using multiple filters, we find each filter detects feature in the output of previous layer. So, to capture different features, learn multiple filters. Here, important point is to be noted is that the number of output feature maps is usually larger than the number of input feature maps. This will be having more clarity when we implement CNN subsequently. Next is we will discuss about the filters, how they learn an abstract representation of an image which you can see in the figure. Let's see how we can further reduce the parameters to make our computation faster. Building of translational invariance. Let us assume filter is an eye detector. Now the question is, how can we make the detection robust to the exact location of the eye? By pooling, example, maximum or average filter responses at different locations, we gain robustness to the exact spatial location of features. Pooling also subsamples the image, allowing the next layer to look at larger spatial regions. This subsampling also reduces the dimension of our input vectors and make the computation much more faster than the previous computation we have shown. Now let's come to the summary of a typical convolutional layer. Doing all of this consists one convolutional module. Pooling and normalization is however optional, but it is highly recommended since it increases the computational speed. Stack these conv modules and train them just like multi-layer neural nets. Final layer is usually fully connected neural net with output size equal to number of classes. We thus saw step by step how this neural net is implemented in this video. Next, let's compare this to shift as we have discussed in last video. If you just remember, in shift, here we have applied oriented edges to our images to learn the features. Then pooling is done to subsample images. This is normalized to unit length and this output is called feature vector. Compare this to shift. You can see how shift compares to CNN modules. Instead of applying edges, our convolution learns features automatically. Spatial pooling and normalization layers remain relatively the same. Now, revisiting the composition idea, we find every layer learns a feature detector by combining the output of the layer before. More and more abstract features are learned. We stack the layers. In the next videos, we'll move directly for implementation of convnets using examples, and we'll have the more clarity on these videos that we have taken. So feel free to contact us for any clarification, and you can also send your queries directly to the following email address. Thank you. Hope you have enjoyed learning.